Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Boswell Book Company virtual event series. It's day 4,218. Today you're on Zoom, of us being in business, I should say. We're so grateful to have two of our very favorite co-sponsors for this event. They have wonderful programs of their own that we co-sponsor. I'd like to introduce, first of all, from the Harry and Rose Sampson Family Jewish Community Center, Jody Hirsch, the Director of Judaic Education, to say a few words.
Yes, so thank you so much. And we're really pleased to be part of this. You know, it's really part of our Tapestry initiative. Tapestry is Jewish arts and ideas at the Jewish Community Center. And this is a great event. And I have to say, we're doing this with two of our favorite co-sponsors, collaborators, friends. You know, I think that Boswell Books has just been such a great partner just throughout all the years, and we really appreciate Boswell Books and Daniel, and for all the help you've given us and all of the great programs that we've done together. And of course, HERC, the Holocaust Education Resource Center, also is one of our favorite partners. And so we're really happy that we can be part of this program here. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more. Thank you so much, and thank you all in the audience for coming to this event.
Let's move on to our other wonderful partner who does so many book events, and that is the Nathan and Esther Pell's Holocaust Education Research Center. And Carrie Altman is the Director of Outreach and Community Programs, and they always have a lot of really great programs going on. So Carrie?
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm so happy to be here tonight. And as Daniel mentioned, I'm the Director of Outreach and Community Programming at the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center, otherwise known as HERC, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we are so incredibly grateful to Boswell Book Company and the JCC as partners tonight. And also two of our very favorite partners have been for a very long time. So thank you so much, Daniel and Jody. HERC's mission is dedicated to the building of a society resting on the values of tolerance and diversity, dignity and respect towards all human beings. And HERC teaches these lessons to community members, educators, and students every day throughout the state of Wisconsin. And we are so grateful for all of your support, especially now.
We are, yes, we are a triangle of love and appreciation, not for each other, but also for Max Gross and his new book, The Lost Shtetl. I told Chris, I mentioned when this came in our inbox that this was a possibility, and he said, "Did you read my rec? I love that book." So he got me to read it too, and we've been passing it around. The reviews have been terrific. I particularly loved this one from Daphne Merkin in Vogue. I'm kind of fond of her as a writer as well. A dose of fabulism may be the best cure yet for a psychologically intolerable contemporary moment. Another book that helped me forget the anxiety inside and out was The Lost Shtetl by Max Gross, an implausible tale about Kreskol, a tiny Polish village of 900 squabbling Jews that the Nazis and all their systemic efficiency managed to overlook. What might have been a shticky and sentimental story about the ways of man or the battle between good and evil becomes a riveting narrative about the costs of living in one's time as opposed to the benefits and disadvantages of living in a lost horizon that has been overlooked by the contemporary world. If this novel doesn't take your mind off being holed up in a shuttered down city or trying to escape the reality of the pandemic by socially distancing somewhere in the country, nothing will. Max Gross is a former staff writer for the Forward and currently the editor-in-chief of the Commercial Observer. Tonight, he is in conversation with Andrew, and I did a terrible thing and didn't say, "Could you please pronounce this for me?" But I'm going to go with Silow-Carroll.
You had it the first time.
Silo, damn, darn. Editor-in-chief of New York Jewish Week and former editor of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency and manager. Forward, possibly where they might have met. We're so grateful to have both of you. Thank you so much. Welcome, congratulations, all that. we take it over to you.
So I think, thanks so much, Daniel. It's a pleasure, and thanks to your co-sponsors. It's great to be here. What I'm going to do tonight is Max is going to start with a reading from the novel, and then we'll have some Q&A. He and I will go back and forth for a while. Then we'll, if you have questions, put them in the chat function, and I'll curate to the best I can. I can't promise you we'll get to all of them, but if you don't ask a question that I didn't ask, I'm glad to jump to it. I should just start this by saying that Max and I are old colleagues. I was managing editor of The Forward many years ago, and Max was I don't know, cub reporter, office manager / everything else, and he went on to do just an amazing novel, a first novel that I urge everyone to read. And I hope if you haven't, tonight will give you enough of a tease that you'll jump and do it. So Max, why don't we start by reading? I don't know if you need to set it up, but I think, as Daniel just said, this is a book about a shtetl that has somehow escaped the Nazis and is only discovered in modern times. Max, you want to take it away?
Yeah, no, and thank you, Daniel, and thank you so much, Andy, for doing this tonight. Yes, so the premise of the book is that there is a shtetl in Poland that is so hermetic and isolated that the Nazis overlook it, the Soviets overlook it, and it is like rediscovered in the here and now. And the way it's rediscovered is that there's a marital dispute. Two people run off in, presumably different directions, but the town elders decide to send this lone orphan named Yankel, he's an adult now, but nobody cares about him, out into the wilderness to try to alert the Gentile authorities that that there might have been a crime, there might have been something amiss. And so he goes to the nearest town, he sees, all of modernity, and they all assume he's crazy when he tells them that he's from the shtetl. So they lock him up in a mental institution. And at a certain point, they realize that his story is true. So I'm going to start at that point. Now that it was established that Kreskel was a real place with real inhabitants, these matters needed to be attended to urgently. Dr. Babiak took it upon herself to make the first call to the governor and felt silly explaining to the administrator who answered the phone. There's a secret shtetl filled with Jews which survived the war, Dr. Babiak said when she was asked what the call was about. There's no danger so far as we know. They're all living just as they always did, but we thought we should tell somebody about it. The other end of the line was silent for several moments before the secretary spoke. What's a shtetl? And while the hospital spent months dithering to and fro, the wheels of government moved surprisingly rapidly. Several deputies called back, and the governor himself got on the phone a few hours later. He apparently believed that this little village had the potential to become a big media story, a modern-day Brigadoon, if you will, and everyone should be prepared. An elderly Yiddish translator was summoned from Warsaw, and several government officials descended on Our Lady of Mercy to interview the various parties involved. When they were satisfied that no hoaxes were being pulled, it was agreed that the government had a duty to visit Kreskel and welcome it to its rightful place in contemporary Polish society. The only thing left to do is actually locate Kreskel, said Raymond Sikorsky, the slight, middle-aged official the voivodeship had sent to Our Lady of Mercy Hospital. We will take a helicopter over the forest tomorrow. The helicopter took off from the outskirts of town and landed in the center of Kreskel the next day. And Yankel, who had left town as an expendable, acceptable loss in the course of finding the truly important people, was suddenly thrust into a heretofore unimaginable position of authority and wisdom. The people of Kreskel had gathered in a crowd, the size of which Yankel had never seen before. They stared in stupefaction. They wept. And for the moment, Yankel was as puzzled as the Gentiles. Then he heard one of the townspeople look at the translator and cry, Moshiach. The throngs followed suit, shouting, Moshiach, 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 over and over. For the first time since he had left his home months earlier, He realized just how simple and artless the people he left behind were, the poor souls. Of course, 3 months ago, Yankel would have no doubt had the same reaction. "What's going on here?" the rabbi asked. "Is this the Messiah?" And Yankel began to explain what I recounted a few chapters earlier. I have a passage where the helicopter lands and everybody thinks that the translator is the Messiah. After the initial shock had worn off somewhat, it was decided that the succeeding business should be conducted in a less public setting. "Who are these people?" Rabbi Sokolow asked Yankel after the trio had been trotted into his study and examined by the old and esteemed of Kreskel. The younger and less educated were crammed into Rabbi Sokolow's hallway, each with their ears pointed to the rabbi's oak door, eager to hear the miraculous news for themselves. "This man is Raymond Sikorsky," Yankel said, introducing the short, bespectacled Gentile with the receding hairline who carried with himself the aura of leadership. "He is with the Voivodeship." "And who is he?" Rabbi Sokolow said, pointing to the aged, shrunken Jew who had jumped out of the chariot with the Gentile. "His name is Jared something," Yankel replied. "He's here to translate." Rabbi Sokolow looked as if he tried to weigh his words before he spoke, anxious not to offend anyone's sensibilities, particularly one who might have the imprimatur of holiness. "So he's not the Messiah?" Rabbi Sokolow asked. The translator chuckled softly to himself. "No, I'm not anybody important," he ventured in Yiddish. A more worldly observer would place his accent in Riga. He then gestured to the Gentile chieftain. "He's the important one," which were largely the last words he would speak for himself. "Good people of Kreskel," the translator said a few minutes later for the chieftain, "I'm here to fill you in on everything you might have missed. Yes, we missed a lot. I have sometimes lost track of what Sikorsky told us that afternoon and what we learned later over the next few months, but the fundamentals of the last century were recounted. World War II, the Cold War, the creation of the State of Israel, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, a man on the moon, the eradication of polio, the instant coffee powder, even if normal coffee was an unfamiliar commodity in these parts. When Sikorsky spoke about World War II, he was determined that we would not be left with the same doubts as Yankel Lewinkov. He produced 11 photographs, which he placed on the rabbi's wooden desk for each man to examine for himself. "Millions died," the Gentile explained, pointing to the glossy black and white images of Babi Yar, Auschwitz, and Treblinka. Poland was almost completely cleansed of Jews. As he said the word cleansed, the Gentile's face changed color, as if he had accidentally said something impolite.
Well, so that's a great setup for the things I want to talk about, and just a great piece of writing, Max, because you went from a comic high to a dramatic low in a very short walk. So a terrific piece. So I should say I'm curious. I want to go a little bit backwards in your own career, because I knew you as a you wrote about real estate. You were a journalist. You always had a good eye for stories. I remember you once did a report about a magic talking carp at a fish store run by Hasidic Jews in upstate New York.
In New Square, New York.
That sentence is delightful. So maybe that was your start in Jewish fabulism. But I know less about your background in fiction, and I want to know what was your apprenticeship? Where did you get your chops as a novelist?
Well, I have to admit, I had always wanted to be a novelist, and I'd always been working on fiction in my sideline, but I didn't really want to go to school for it. So I was always just doing a lot of experimentation. And, I think that after college, I thought a lot about going to grad school. And I even made an attempt, which did not go anywhere. But I was, even as a kid, just working on these little short stories about the Civil War or about, the Holocaust, as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
But I had always been wanting to do this. And when I graduated from college originally, right before I started at the Forward, I did a year in Arad, Israel, at the Arad Arts Project, where I was working on a novel that kind of got buried alive, which was it was about a psychiatrist who loses his mind and gives his patients all sorts of advice that ruins their lives in various ways, which was a funny idea, but didn't really go anywhere.
Mhm.
And I just didn't have the attention to sort of stick with it. But when I got the idea for the Lost Shtetl, and I've been working on it for a few years, I was like, this is a really good idea, so I've got to sort of follow it through. And it went through a number of incarnations. I finished my first draft of it in 2014, and gave it to a really smart agent named Michelle Brower. And she looked at it and said, this is, it has a lot of potential, but it has a lot of like blind alleys that you've gone down, a lot of mistakes that you've made. If you're serious, I can give you notes. And she gave me wonderful notes on the book. And I spent, it was right when my son was born. So I took some time off just to, focus on the little, wailing, crying infant that was in my house. But after like some time, I got back to the notes, really took them seriously, and worked on it every day and just tried to, this was something I believed in. I wanted to really get it out and finish it. And so that's what I did. And it developed some good habits that self-taught kind of thing. I learned that you had to actually really have attention, focus on this work and work on it for a considerable period of time if you want to finish it.
Right. So I looked at, when I read The Lost Shtetl, I called it Jewish magical realism in a way. And I thought of other people who work in this genre. That includes Steve Stern, who's of a different generation than yours, Michael Chabon, of course. Helen Wecker wrote The Golem and the Genie. And Darrell Horn's most recent novel, Eternal Life, is about a young Jewish woman who's immortal. So these are novels, they explore the present or historical Jewish reality through either a supernatural twist or an alternative history. Yours is about, like you said, a Jewish brigadoon. Why was this sort of counter reality the best way to tell the story you wanted to tell?
Well, I mean, I guess that part of the reason is because I think of the Holocaust as such a watershed moment in Jewish history. Something that I really do think it means something to be something different to be a Jew before the Holocaust versus after the Holocaust. I don't think that that's all there is to being Jewish. In fact, I think that there is so much, background, et cetera. But to have missed this watershed struck me as a very interesting concept. What was different about like the way the Jews see themselves and the Jews see the modern world if, absent this major thing. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to tell the story. And I thought it was a good time travel setup. You could like, the people in the town could step in, in the 19th century, step out in the 21st century, and without the magical element. Of course, it's like magical realism, it's got those elements, of course, but in a semi-credible way, like that there is some sort of explanation for how they could, have this portal between, now and then.
Mm-hmm. So the book is, is that personal to you? Was your family touched by the Holocaust?
Well, to a certain extent, yes. My great grandparents came from Poland, and my great grandfather left like a family of 7. There, he was one of 7, and his family all died, except for one sister and her daughter, who went east and moved to Israel. And when I was actually in the Arad Arts Project, which I was talking about, I was living in Israel. I went to Tel Aviv to visit her, and saw that side of the family. But for the most part, no. I feel like we were, one of the lucky families. Like, we didn't escape. We escaped, in the early 1900s, and that I think is also part of it. Kreskel is a blessed, fortunate place, like almost like American Jewry. That was also, I think, part of the story of being a contemporary Jew. To have missed that, horrible thing is as much a part of the story as to have experienced it too.
Kreskel may be blessed, but it's not romanticized, I don't think. When you think about the way a lot of American Jews think about the shtetl, it's a very sentimental impulse, starting with Fiddler on the Roof. Famously, you might have even consulted this book, Life is with People, from 1952. It was a Mark Zborowski, and it had a very sweet, sanitized view of shtetl life. But your village, Kreskel, is there are prostitutes, there's infighting among the residents, there's unwed mothers and thieves. Was it important to you to present a realistic picture of pre-war Jewish life in Poland?
Oh, absolutely.
How did you research it? How much did you ground it in a reality?
Well, I mean, look, Andy, you know that if you work at the Forward newspaper, you are interested in this topic long before you start on a novel about this. I mean, I remember writing for you a story about like the PBS special on the shtetls of Poland or something like that. So it had been in my library for a real.
It was every story you did for me, if I remember.
It was a lot of them. There were many of those stories. I'm not gonna. I mean, I think that, so it's funny. One of the things that you mentioned when you wrote about the book was Ina Grada, widow of Chaim Grada. Am I stepping on something that we're going to talk about later? Or
no, go for it. Go for it. I can't get enough of the Gradas, so go ahead.
I know. So the story was, when I was at the Forward, I was the low man on the totem pole, and I got all the calls. All the calls came to my desk. And one of the people who called me on a very, very regular basis was the widow of Chaim Grada, who was one of the great Yiddish writers. And she called me whenever her husband's name was mentioned in any context whatsoever. But the other time she would call me all the time was if we mentioned Isaac Bashevis Singer and what a monster he was, because he depicted the Jews in a horrific, peep show, vulgar, disgusting way. It was like, okay, it's Thursday, Ina Grada is calling me, so I would have to talk to her every week or something.
You were living inside a Cynthia Ozick short story, essentially.
Was it called The Haver? Was that the one about the, they called him The Haver.
Envy.
Envy, yes. I was totally living inside Cynthia Ozick's Envy. And the reason why Ina Grada hated Isaac Bashevis Singer, why many others hated him, was because he did not shy away from all of the earthy, carnal elements of life amongst Jews today. We're no better, no worse, and we have our transgressors, and that was always a part of shtetl life. One of my great sources for the book was a book called There Once Was a World by Yafa Eliach,
sure,
which is a really, really great book. And she talked all about the village prostitutes, and what would happen to the unwedded mothers, and I mean, like, momser is a term because they existed. Like, there were people who were born out of wedlock and had seedy backgrounds and stuff like that. So I never thought that it should be sweetened. I thought it should always be realistic, and which is enough.
Since we're talking about great Yiddish writers, I want to talk about the voice in your book, because that was really, it blew me away. Just the, I don't want to call it ventriloquism, but you had a way of capturing something that was between, well, first of all, let's start with the narration. The narration is the second person plural. I don't know the technical term. It's a we voice. It's an unseen Greek chorus. So even that is just, a surprising way to tell a story. And secondly is that, the voice is ironic and sharp, but it also has a folksy feel, which put me in mind of some of the, certainly just the translations that I'm familiar with, of the great, Yiddish writers like Shalom Aleichem or Mendel Moichesfor and Mendel the Book Peddler. How did you develop the voice for the novel, and what helped you find it? Were you reading the Yiddish greats, either in the original or translation?
Well, definitely not in the Yiddish. I hate to say it, Andy.
I'm with you. Great regret. I always say, once I conquer Hebrew, I'll move on to Yiddish. So that's not going to happen.
I was like, the bad kid in Hebrew school. They were like, dude, that kid is an idiot. Like, he really doesn't understand his Hebrew. And it always killed me because, so these great grandparents that I had from Poland, they spoke Yiddish. And my great grandfather, he spoke like English in such a halting way. And it always killed me that I never could learn it. No, I mean, but I was always very interested in the Yiddish folk tales, singer. And I definitely believe that that this story was very much about being a modern day fairy tale, a modern day folk tale. Like, it had to be that. So I wanted it to be in that whole spirit. In terms of, I mean, it's one of the things with writing. I mean, like, sometimes you just settle into something and it just flows. I came up with the idea for the Pesha element of the book.
Pesha is the love interest of Yankel.
Right. And she starts the book.
In a sense, who makes her way out of the shtetl as well as Yankel does.
Right. I came up with that element and started telling it, and then it just slipped into that. Like, that voice, all of a sudden, it was like, you're an actor or something like that, and you start playing a part. And after that, it just felt really natural writing it that way. Mm-hmm.
Do you read when you write? Do you keep up with fiction? Or are you one of these people who says, no, I can only read nonfiction, because I don't want to, scramble my brain.
For so many years that I would have to be writing. I would have had to have given up on fiction altogether. Right. No, I actually think that it's good to. I always feel very inspired when I read, really wonderful writing. I feel like there were so many books that wound up leaving their footprints as I was working on this book. I read David Copperfield for the first time while I was writing this book, because I was working on it for so damn long. And Yankel, it's very much a David Copperfield story, mm-hmm. or an Oliver Twist or something like that. And so I feel inspired when I read wonderful writing. Mm-hmm. But that being said, I also read a lot of nonfiction as well.
So as we're speaking right now here in New York, there's a lot of media attention on the ultra-Orthodox community and the Hasidic community. And if people don't know, they're fighting the coronavirus restrictions in New York, which they say are making it hard for them to follow their religion. In many ways, these communities are recreating the shtetl as they kind of idealize it back in the old country. It's a way of life that's, pre-modern, from the clothes they wear, self-governance, and they have a great distrust of the outside world. And this is where your book comes in. That they're attempting to keep the outside world at bay. Were you thinking about today's ultra-Orthodox during your writing?
Oh, definitely. I mean, and obviously this, certainly predated the whole COVID issue. But I mean, when I was writing for the foreword, I was going to New Square, New York, where you step off the bus and you are the odd man, like you are the stranger in that town,
Right.
and you are not given a friendly welcome. I mean, I did that story, and I had to try to.
Our talking fish story.
Yeah, this was a story I wrote for Andy 18 years ago. About the talking fish of New Square, New York. It was a carp that in a fish market suddenly came to life, supposedly, and started claiming he was the ancestor of a rabbi who had lived in the town. Anyway, but those towns, I mean, they speak Yiddish, and they don't really, I know so many former Hasids who have left the fold, who are like, I didn't know my American birthday until I left. And, I'd never turned on a TV before I left. And, they did recreate the Shtetl. So I think that a lot of neighborhoods in Brooklyn or upstate New York, they might as well be. I think if you want a good picture of what Shtetl life is like, just go to, Borough Park for a couple of days and you'll see it.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see it.
How else is the book about the present as opposed to the pre-war Jewish past? You're in dialogue with the present. So what did you want to say in addition to kind of, to me, the painful part of the book is the loss that's represented even within the humor. But what are you saying about the present?
Well, I think that there is rightly a lot of ambivalence about the present and, the seductions of technology, the seductions of living an easy modern life. I think that I understand where that rejection comes from amongst certain people. I mean, I certainly am a believer in progress, and I'm certainly a believer in air conditioning and medical care and all the the wonders of the modern world. But I understand that for a lot of people, it feels like an attack on their past. And I think that happens a lot in the modern world. I don't think that's just strictly confined to Jewry or Orthodox Jewry. I think that it happens in a lot of different forms. In many ways, it's one of the central questions that we're grappling with now as a country, as a world, is how much do we, look to the past versus the future? I mean, I'm always a believer in look to the future, but I certainly understand that pull towards nostalgia.
Mm-hmm. I'm also thinking about the contemporary Poland when I was writing this. I don't know if you traveled there or what your research was into Poland, but it's such a Jewish contradiction, Poland, because on one hand, Jewish life flourished there for centuries. Rich culture, Shtetl, like the ones you're describing, but it's also haunted by anti-Semitism. The Holocaust was certainly a catastrophe, but it wasn't an aberration. And even after the Holocaust, the Jews who tried to go back were basically told this is not their home. What does Poland mean to you in the context of the book? Because I find it's a very interesting relationship between the townspeople. Poland, the authorities embrace them originally until they start becoming a bit of a headache. And then it becomes political football. What do we do about Kreskel? What does Poland mean to you in the context of the novel? Sure.
Well, I will say, Andy, if you see this poster behind me, I actually bought that in Poland. So I have been to Poland once before. It's a come see Palestine. It was from the 20s or 30s or something like that I got while I was there. was always very interested in Poland. I went to it after I started writing the book. I'd already been a couple years into the writing of it. Poland changed over the course of me writing this book. And it definitely affected the outcome of the book. I mean, I don't think that it was nearly as big a part of what I thought it would be when I started. You know, I know so many, you know, Poles who are aghast at what is going on in Poland currently, you know, just like what's going on with their government, and, you know, how much they've embraced this, you know, ultranationalism that they thought had long ago been dispelled. If you read Anne Applebaum's new book, I think it's called The Twilight of Democracy. It's a very, very good book about Poland, but also about Hungary, and and to a certain extent Great Britain as well. Just about the real shift that happened there. Having been to Poland once, having had, you know, Polish ancestry, it does break my heart, just like, you know, how far it's gone in this direction. I do have a friend who lived in Poland for a year, and she told me that, and this was, you know, early into my writing the book, but she was saying to me that when she was there in the 1990s, when people found out that she was Jewish, the question of, like, you know, reparations, that someday the Jews would come back for their property, was still in the minds of a lot of people that she spoke to. It was still there. It was still this germ. And yet I think of Poland as, like, you know, the home of people who sacrificed so much in World War II and were so valiant. So I think there are a lot of contradictions in that country.
Right, right. I'd recommend to our audience a new book by David Nassau called The Last Million, which is about what happened immediately after the war and the repatriation and the displacement of a million people, of whom many were Jews, stuck in Germany. And Poland was not their home anymore for a lot of the Jews, even though they'd come from there. So I recommend that highly. It's a fascinating book. The typical, I promised you I'd ask this question in our chat earlier. The typical debut novel is often thinly veiled autobiography. It's usually not an ambitious quasi-historical novel told in the voices of multiple characters. So where are you in this book? Is there a character who speaks for Max Gross, or are you dispersed among many of the voices in the book?
Well, I mean, I'm dispersed a little, but there's definitely a lot of me in the character of Yankel. I think he's probably a nicer person than I am. I want to be as sweet as he is. I try, but he was definitely my perspective on things. A little bit hapless, a little bit luckless, but
Love struck
too. But you know, I think that I would, if I was living in Shtetl, I would be that guy who was sort of not quite one of the, like, you know, the yeshiva kids, but somebody who's a little bit off the beaten path.
Right. Do you see yourself, I'm going to ask, this is kind of a required question also, but do you see yourself as a Jewish novelist now? And I'll let you define that any way you'd like.
Well, you know, it's an interesting question. Yes, I do. I'm not 100% sure that I will always be. I think that there are other novels that I will write that, you know, will probably not be, certainly not like this. I mean, I certainly feel like this was a very big departure for me because I'm not religious. I was not religious as a kid. And I was very interested in my, Jewish roots, and as you say, as I said earlier, you can't work for the Forward newspaper and not be. But this to me feels like a slightly radical departure, and I think that my next work will probably not be quite as Jewish. That being said, I said this recently to a reporter. I think that there is a reason why there are so many Jewish novelists, and the reason is because we're attracted to the story. The story has so many peaks and so many valleys. You have this watershed like the Holocaust, which is something that no people has ever experienced lows like that. I mean, it's repeated in different forms, but you see the very worst that humanity has to offer, and yet when you talk about Poland before the Holocaust, it was a place where the Jews were making the greatest art. They were making, they believed in their country. They were helping build it up. They were doing, all these things that were amazing and wonderful. So I think that the reason I'm attracted to Jewish stories is because I think that the Jewish history has so many great twists and turns to it.
Mm-hmm. So the book stands on its own, but it came at it dropped in the middle of this pandemic. And I don't know if I agree with Daphne Merkin that this is a great escape from the pandemic, because in some ways, what is the book about? It's about people who are safely in their bubble, and then they have to leave it, and then kind of everything goes to hell. So and that's, you can borrow that for the movie version if you want to make that the tagline. But I was thinking of, did the meanings of the book change for you based on where we are right now, which is about a very different, a very unsafe world, and you mentioned nationalism before, which predates COVID, but that was also some of the the themes that are running through our political culture right now, and our personal.
Well, I'm sorry.
And our personal lives as well.
Sure.
Have the meanings of the book changed for you in this time period?
Definitely. I mean, look, I think that you embark on something that takes you 8 years or so, you're a different person in 8 years. But, and just on a personal level. But I definitely was, I'd finished most of the book well before COVID started, but I was thinking about questions about isolation a lot when COVID started, and what the book had to say about that. And I do think that it's about isolation versus, being cast into a wider world and having responsibilities and duties to be part of that world. I couldn't have known that, so I didn't know that. So, it's I guess just a coincidence. But I think that the world in general has had a very fraught time for the last decade or so, maybe even longer than that. Yeah, I think that I was writing a lot about the politics involved. I definitely don't believe that, I'm very wary of political books, and I wouldn't call this a political book necessarily, but I do think that the politics reflect a general mood in a culture. And I think that the mood in American culture and in world culture is very displaced. And I think that's been the case for a long time. And I think it has a lot to do with modernity, and I think it has a lot to do with technology, and I think it has a lot to do with the change in wages and the promises of the state and all these other things that that are just. I'm rambling now, Andy, so I'll cut me off.
No,
Thank you.
Well, I could also mention another, a coincidence you couldn't have foreseen, which was that I think your book also came out almost simultaneously with the Seth Rogen movie, which is about a time-traveling chassid who finds himself in the 20th century. what was it called? The pickle?
I think it's called An American Pickle. I've not seen it yet,
Right.
but
So something's in the air that people wanna take Shtetl Jews and stick them in the 20th century for some reason.
they must. Yeah, I guess so. It's a funny idea, I guess.
Speaking of that, someone in the chat asks about, were you aware of the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy? This is another First Contact movie from I think 30 years ago, about an African tribe that I guess what we call a cargo cult. They get contacted for the first time by modernity. You aware of it?
I'm definitely aware. I mean, I saw it back in the 80s. So that
Right.
was like a good 30, 35 years ago. I don't remember anything about that movie, but I do remember going up to Sammy Rubinstein's apartment on like 2 floors above mine and watching The Gods Must Be Crazy with him and his family. So yeah, I saw it. It must have, left a mark. But I don't remember anything about it other than that I saw a movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy in Sammy Rubinstein's apartment.
We have time for just a couple questions, maybe from the chat. Someone's asking, someone who was in Arad around this with you during the program. Was that Woodges or that was just
Yeah, it was Woodges. Yeah.
She asked if there were elements or themes of your writing and your Israel experience in this book. She recognizes that was a long time ago.
Well, Israel was, for me, a really interesting experience. It really was one of the more formative ones. When you're out of college and you're, doing something when you're that far away from home for a cloistered, nice Jewish boy like myself. It was, I did not have a Jewish, a religious background, but I did have Woodges. I did hang out with, some fairly religious people, and I did learn a lot. I mean, that was a good education. That was a good education, not just in what it means to, be a Jew, to be practicing Jewish, but also it was a great education about Israel. I'm not talking about the current government of Israel, but the Bible. You saw, okay, well, this is where, Moses parts the Red Sea or something like that. It was a great experience for that. And it was a great experience for seeing something very, very different than everything that I had been accustomed to, which is the story of the Lost Shtetl. So I definitely think that was a very formative one for myself.
Right. I'm not going to ask that question. What are you working on next? But I should note you have a full-time job and you're writing. How do you manage to keep it up? And I think you have a 5-year-old at home.
I have a soon-to-be 6-year-old, but yes, 5-year-old.
Young dads. I didn't even know. My kids are in their 20s. I can't even tell you how old they are. How do you keep up that pace between full-time job? I mean, what do you every morning you give yourself 2 hours? How do you work it?
Well, I'll tell you. So I think I mentioned when I got the notes back from Michelle Brower, I did not really work on the book for 2 years because I had this, little baby that I had to look after, which was a mistake, but it was also something sort of inevitable. I, like a lot of people, not to bring up politics, even though I think we're bringing it up a lot, I was not a happy camper when Donald Trump won the presidency. And I was pretty determined to not look at the news for a while. I read the news, but I was not going to look at television or anything like that. And my son was about a little less than 2 when that happened. And I made the resolution that I was going to finish this book and finish the edits of this book. And I would wake up every day at 5 a.m. and work for a good 3 hours or so before I had to go off to my job. And it was a good habit to form. I still do that. Like maybe lately I've been like 6 is fine, but I try to write every day because I think that it's really, really critical not to lose one's like concentration over that. Like, I think you have to really be obsessed with a topic to give it proper justice. And so, yeah, I wake up every morning and work for a couple of hours before I then go on to my other job.
Sure. Well, I think I've covered my ground. It was a pleasure to read. It was a surprise to me, not in the sense that I didn't think the world of you, but I had never heard your voice, your fictional voice, and it was just so, it was so fully formed. It didn't. This is faint praise, but it didn't feel like a first novel. My joke was, there's a shelf of Max Gross books out there that I hadn't gotten to for some reason, but so really, really congratulations on a really beautiful piece of writing. A fun novel, a sad novel, just really, I'm proud of you, Max. That's what I'm trying to say. So,
thank you, Andy.
But we're about out of time, so I think I'm turning it back to Daniel.
We wanted to thank you. Thank Harper Villa and Paul Olszewski for helping us put this event together. Thank our co-sponsors, the Harry and Rose Sampson Family Jewish Community Center and the Nathan and Esther Pelz Holocaust Education Resource Center for their help in getting the word out. And thank all of you for coming. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you. Hope to see you at another event. Looking forward to both of your writings in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Andy.
Pleasure.